Welcome to Cut Through the Noise with Dave Turano, bringing you the truth behind the headlines in business and current events. Let's go.
Today, I am with Tracy MacNeal. Tracy's CEO of Materna Medical. And Materna is a California-based startup specializing in female pelvic health. Tracy is somebody I've known for a few years. She's got a very interesting background. She's got a degree in chemical engineering, an MBA in healthcare sector management. Her experience runs the gamut from big pharma to the startup world. She's an engineer by trade, but she's been in sales. She's run companies, been on boards, been an investor, worn many, many hats. So, Tracy, it's been a few years since I've actually seen you, but thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So how did I do with the intro? Did I cover everything? Did I miss anything?
It's fantastic. I appreciate it. It's been interesting to start life as a technical person. And, I think spending a little time in business, it just gave me a taste of what it's like. And I find people to be the most complicated engineering system there is. And that's basically what business is.
That's a great point. So kind of, just to kind of kick off with a little icebreaker, tell us, what are you all about and how did you get into this?
Oh, what am I all about? Lately, I'm all about showing that when you invest in women, you win. Now, up until I found Materna, I was all about medtech commercialization, and I still am, right? So now I'm bringing my background from medtech commercialization to women's health. And when I found Materna, I just was so impressed with what they had done, what had been created, markets with almost no competition, well-protected intellectual property, really great clinical results. So all the things that investors should be looking for. The challenge for Materna is that it's in women's health, and women's health is historically underinvested. And I'll pause. I'll just say underinvested is also a huge opportunity for investors.
I mean, some of the things we're going to talk about today is this whole sector of female pelvic health and how historically the medical industry has or hasn't invested in it, spoken about it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the startup world and all the hats you have to wear. So as long as you're comfortable with that, I'm going to dive in.
Oh, absolutely.
How did Materna come about?
We have an incredible founder, a man ahead of his time, Mark Jurevich, who was a part of the Stanford Biodesign program. They have a special program that high potential talent from medical device companies can go, and they don't start with solutions. They start with big unmet needs in healthcare, and they break the teams up and teach them how to create solutions from that perspective. And that's really where our two products came from.
So one product focuses, and this I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert here, so this is way beyond my comfort zone. So the first product addresses tearing during childbirth. This product was designed to help what?
So because we have some time, I'm going to tell you the whole story. So what was really fascinating, and when I say our founder was a man before his time, and this was in 2010, the market really wasn't ready for it. And yes, absolutely, it's designed to help tearing. It's a very simple product. It is a simple dilator to basically perform kind of a standardized, robust yoga stretch of the birth canal before the baby comes through. So we're not dilating the cervix, we're not affecting the progress of labor, but when the cervix has naturally opened and the baby's ready to come through the birth canal, the idea is that those muscles have already been pre-stretched so that the baby doesn't have to do the sudden stretching. And that's what causes the damage. And what's interesting is clinicians back then basically kind of shrugged. They were like, well, we can stitch her back up. I mean, can you imagine if any part of a man's anatomy was ripped open routinely, that doesn't get addressed? That's how it was. And so our founder really had some trouble getting traction for the first few years. Our early investors were ardent believers, and bless them, because we really are going to create a huge win and transform women's health. But in the early years, femtech wasn't a thing yet. And it was really the pivot was less around tearing of like the perineum. What we're actually working on is something that is only visible with ultrasound, which is the pelvic muscles that kind of hold all your organs in place. The baby has to pass through those muscles too. And that's actually the majority of the resistance that the baby sees as it's coming through. It's not really the soft tissue, it's the muscles. And so it's those muscles that get damaged as the baby comes through. And they up to 50% of the time are separated from bone. Everybody's comfortable talking about knees and hips, but when you start talking about pelvic floors,
I've had quite a few pelvic floor conversations. I'd say once a week.
Well, it's gotten a lot more common, right? I mean, people are talking about it. But anyway, it was when we did the pivot to really working on those muscles and working on the long-term benefits of stress incontinence and prolapse, which are the number one reasons that women are admitted to nursing homes in old age, by the way. Women are 9 times more likely to have those symptoms if they've had a vaginal delivery.
Okay.
9 times. So this was really the unmet need that started getting people's attention. And now, 10 years later, the company's been around for a while, but I think that we're finally no longer at the bleeding edge or the leading GYNs. A lot of the new obstetricians are women. So you kind of have this barbell of obstetricians, most that are like older men and younger women. And so, it's a different set of people listening. And I think, frankly, women themselves, patients themselves are much more activated now.
So, but you're saying in 2010, 10 years ago, you're saying that the medical community wasn't ready for this?
It was dismissive. It was completely dismissed. As I have another colleague, so the Femtech CEO world is quite small. We mostly know each other. I have a colleague who's creating a prenatal technology, and he was told just 4 years ago, women's health, come back when you have a real market. It's only half the population. Right? So a lot of this is about perceptions, unconscious bias, and it's not just men doing this to women, it's also women themselves.
Okay.
And it always starts with the patient, right? So in medical devices, we're always trying to come up with innovation that's going to help people and take cost out of the system. And those are sometimes at odds with each other, right?
Yep.
But we'll start with the patient, because you never go wrong if you start with the patient. And so if the patient says, hey, doc, something doesn't feel right, this isn't working right, or whatever, ideally the doctor would have a lot of clinic. There's a new thing. If not, sometimes those doctors partner with people like myself or our founder to develop, sort of a better mousetrap, something that would be innovative in that space.
Yep.
But what's interesting in women's health is that culturally, women are taught really never to talk about anything below the waist. It's sort of funny for a guy to talk about stuff below the waist, but it's not really polite for women to do that. And girls are taught from a young age not to refer to anything. There's not even a polite word for it, right?
Yeah. What would you say?
What's the rating of this podcast? What am I allowed to say?
Well, I might have to edit it out depending on what you say, but to your point, I think men historically are a little bit more liberal with the way they, might reference that area of the anatomy. Women.
Well, right. I mean, women. I mean, the list of euphemisms. I'd be goodness gracious.
Yeah. No. Not that you represent all women, and I certainly don't represent all men, but as a woman, though, in a personal conversation, does this stuff ever get tossed around among women to women socially? And not that you would know about everybody.
Well, I circulate in pretty liberal groups, but I have had several of my, because remember, I didn't come from women's health. This is like just the last year and a half, right?
Yeah.
So my personal world has all been a little taken aback, I think. Like, I used to work in polite society, right? And I remember myself, the first time I saw the products, I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Really?
Why? Why'd you think that?
Because they look like sex toys. We're going to be talking about vaginas for the next 5 years. I'm like the vagina CEO. But what I realized was that that term, I was joking about it with my sister. And because I was like, I don't know if I can become the vagina CEO. And she said, the reason you're devaluing that in your head is that our whole society devalues that. And so I realized that I would have to go first. And so if patients can't talk about it to their doctors, then doctors don't have the clinical data to say whether something is a problem or not. 80% are graduating with no training in menopause. Meanwhile, there are 55 million Americans in menopause. 6,000 new people every day.
When does that typically start? Late 40s, 50?
Yeah, late 40s, early 50s.
And how long is it left?
Well, it's funny, you don't know, right? And neither do I. But what I've learned is that because nobody talks about it, what do they used to call it? The change. You couldn't even say menopause on Facebook 3 years ago. You couldn't even put it in an ad. Meanwhile, look what's going on in erectile dysfunction ads.
Yeah.
Baseball players talking about it on TV. This is the cultural issues I'm talking about. It's not just men doing it to women. It's like women kind of living under this sort of their own unconscious biases. Like, well, of course I'm going to tear open. Of course I'll be broken.
Yeah.
Motherhood hurts, right?
Yeah. So what women historically have just kind of tolerated that or accepted that, this is going to happen and it's going to suck. It's going to be really uncomfortable for the rest of my life. And just that's it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is what I've learned as I've gone on this journey myself is that most women who've had a baby of any age, all of them say to me, "Where were you when I had my babies?" Because nobody told me. And so there's two pieces of that are interesting. One is they all want this, right? Like if I could have protected myself, I would have. And then the second piece is doctors don't talk about it to women because there's nothing for it.
Right? And you're talking about pre-birth, prior to.
Yeah, well, basically what our device is it's used in the final stages of labor. Cervix is fully dilated, well, about 60% of the way. So the labor and delivery nurse would put our device in. It's just a little device that just goes right inside the anatomy. It dilates to about 9 centimeters over an hour. Mom's got an epidural, she's taking a nap, and then it collapses and it comes out. But then when the cervix finally opens, mom can get the baby out with one push.
What about on the other side? So there's a lot of women out there who have obviously had children and have had this happen, maybe have done nothing to deal with it. You mentioned prolapse and incontinence, and I remember as a kid, women in the neighborhood or moms or aunts, they couldn't cough or sneeze or laugh without peeing their pants. I mean, is that what this is all about? Is that what happens?
That's totally what this is about, right? I mean, so women will joke about the incontinence, like, "Oh, don't make me laugh," or like, "I used to be a runner." There's a lot of that sort of thing, or like, "Don't make us do jumping jacks." So women will joke about that and they're pretty open about it. Prolapse is a more significant, I don't want to say it's more significant, it's more painful and it's very embarrassing. Women don't joke about it. But that's essential I had to look it up. It's basically where the organs the uterus starts to fall out of place. It can be the rectum too, but basically if you sort of look at the cross section of a woman, you've got the urethra and the vagina and the rectum, and they all are like right there, right? It's also true for men minus the vagina, right? You've got these tubes that come out. And if they don't have enough support around the pelvic floor, that's called prolapse. And so it can manifest in a bunch of symptoms. Sometimes the uterus actually comes out. It can fall into, like the rectum and the vagina, and can fall into each other. So that's painful. It can be bloating. And so there's lots and lots of technologies for trying to help people who have these issues, but they're super tough issues.
I thought you said there were 2 products. What does the other one do?
So this is amazing. So like I mentioned, we have the who's who of scientific advisors, and after our first clinical trial where we reduced pelvic muscle injury by 60%, they turned to us and they said, if you could make the same product smaller, you could help millions of women who have a very bad standard of care. And this is that's when Milli was born. That's our second product. And it's also a dilator, but it's much smaller. It's also sold through OBGYNs, but women can buy it directly online at milliforher.com, MILLI. And it's an incredibly common set of problems, again, that women don't realize is so common. What we find is by the time they find us, they maybe have seen 3 or 4 clinicians who can't help them.
Yeah.
Again, to the lack of training out in the gynecology space. But it's essentially, so 1 in 3 women has pain during intercourse at some point in their life. It could be for something simple like a yeast infection. It could be something more complicated like endometriosis. But for whatever reason, if sex hurts, she often will begin to avoid it. And then once she begins to avoid it, the canal actually begins to shrink. The soft tissue shrinks and the muscles around it can become involuntarily tight. So similar to the cycle of low back pain, or I get this chronic neck thing when I'm stressed. I get the Quasimodo neck, where my shoulder comes up, and, I can stretch those muscles out because they cross a joint.
Yeah.
Tip my head and my neck stretches. But your pelvic floor is in a circle.
Yeah.
So if you get that kind of Charlie horse trigger point kind of stuff, that's essentially what that happens. And it's about as common as erectile dysfunction. So it's a huge market, millions and millions of women just in the United States alone.
So back up for a second. I'm curious here. So you've got this situation where there's discomfort during intercourse for who knows what reason. And as a result of that, many women will start to avoid. So they start to avoid it, and that triggers like cramping and things like that are like almost like Charlie horses in that area.
It can. It's more like your muscles kind of involuntarily tense up.
Like I'll get it in my every once in a while at night, my calf will cramp up on me, and it's just excruciating.
Exactly.
So that's what it feels like?
For some women. Yep. For some women, it's chronic and it hurts that bad all the time. We call it pelvic pain. For some women, it only happens when you try to stretch the muscles out during intercourse. It starts early in life. Some teenagers can't get a tampon in. And it's just, that's kind of how they're built. And that's their journey. There's we collaborate with an incredible film producer named Shelby Haddon. She has a great film, if you're wondering about this, called Tightly Wound.
Okay.
Highly recommend it. She created a documentary about this because it is so common, and for whatever reason, again, this is a cultural women's health thing. It's so common, millions of women, but they all think they're the only one.
So let's talk about that. That's what fascinates me with anything in life. This is obviously a very delicate subject. You label it as what do you call it? Inappropriate talk or whatever, but it really isn't. I mean, we've all got these parts. So,
yep, right.
Women have their parts and men have theirs, and some people have both, and that's the way it is. And we've got them, whether we want them or not.
That's right.
So, but the bottom line is, even if I know there's a fix for something, no matter what it is, there are a lot of people, even if it's a minor thing, like if I have a toothache, for example, I don't want to go to the dentist. I just want the toothache to go away, but I dread the idea of the Novocaine and all that stuff. I don't want to talk about it. And that's a tooth. Right. But when you talk about anything below the waist, I could hardly have a conversation with my boys about, the sex talk. And my wife, she said, I think you gotta say something. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I remember going upstairs with my oldest, and if he listens to this, then, well, he's going to be embarrassed. But I'm like, all right, man, I got to talk to you about this. I don't want to talk to you about it. You don't want to hear it. But I go, how, the Discovery Channel comes on and, when animals are breeding and the baby, and he's like, people do the same thing. You know that, right? He's like, yep, I do. I go, okay, good. Do you have any questions? And that was literally, I mean, literally, I'm talking.
It's hard. It's really hard. We're like,
yes. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. So, but when it comes to yourself, like anybody, when it comes to that area is probably going to be 10 times more reluctant to even bring it up to a doctor. So, but I would think that doctors probably know that. And, I think about the work I do for a living with, business professionals. And so often really what they need from me is not the advice or the process or the methodology to solve a problem. They just need the entry point into a conversation. How do I say this to somebody? How do I work through this conversation so that they understand me and I understand them? And some of those conversations are very awkward and uncomfortable. And it's usually the words that they can't master. And I would think in this case, doesn't it still come down to that? You've got to say the words. You've got to say.
You have to say the words. But these are words that women don't even say in their own heads.
Right.
And so, but I think your point about the Novocaine and the toothache is probably a perfect example, right? Because I don't know about you, but I get embarrassed with like if I I don't want to tell someone I need a filling. They're going to think I haven't been brushing my teeth. There's a lot of reasons people don't go to the doctor, but shame is definitely one of them for
Yeah.
both men and women, right? And the more intimate the issues, the less likely the person is to want to go. People are so isolated. I mean, and also not for nothing in COVID, everybody's anxiety and panic disorders, like all those numbers are shooting through the roof. And the level of isolation, uncertainty, and ambiguity in people's lives were hard enough right before.
Yep.
And I think for some people, actually, COVID has blossomed their lives.
I agree with you. I think there is a lot of good. I think, a lot of people that I talk to are starting to find more enjoyment in the simple. Like,
yes.
But for example, we have a garden, which we have a garden every year, but for some reason this year it's exploded.
This year got bigger.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Enough of the cucumbers. I mean, literally, I must have cucumbers. I don't know what to do with them. We're pickling them and giving them to neighbors. They keep coming.
There's a joke about that, though, in the South where I grew up in a small town. It's the only time you have to lock your car so people don't leave zucchinis on your seat.
I get it, because there are a few people I've asked in the last week who have turned me down. They're like, Dave, I can't take it. Everyone's giving this stuff away. It's out of control. Anyway.
Exactly, right? So people don't give you more.
I just interviewed a startup just last week out here in Massachusetts. But as the CEO of a startup, especially a newer startup, I mean, your responsibilities are like infinite.
Yeah.
How do you balance them? And what are they? What are they for you?
Oh man. Well, let's see. Well, I sort of think people and patients, right? You put the patients at the center, always, always, always. The next ring out is, your team. And for me, that's a small group of folks.
Mm-hmm.
But of employees, but we have a ton of consultants, people that drop in and make a huge difference in our lives and then drop back out. We have 30 like that. And I feel like my number one job really is to communicate.
You're an extension of the marketing department. Even though you're a CEO, you have to tell the story of Materna to
everybody, right? To the board. Yeah. Okay. So I get you. Yeah. So the story has to always be the same story, but people need to hear different parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, like right now we're hearing the kind of the patient market version of this story. It's completely true. Is my truth anyway.
Yep.
And the data to support it.
Yep.
But when I sit with my board, obviously they don't know, they don't need to know all that. They know the data. Yep. They want to know all the things. All those things need to also match what's happening on my daily basis with my team. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily talk to the board. Mm-hmm. But for sure, it's all got to be resonant. I mean, I think that I have a great relationship with my board. I have a wonderful board. But, it takes time to build that. You really have to know your board members, spend time with them, and keep them in the loop, especially when there's bad news. Nothing's going to go the way you think. Hey, we were in the middle of a clinical trial and then COVID hit. And I'm raising money. Our clinical trial went on pause for 3 months. Turned out to just be 3 months. And it looks like, well, who knows, right? Who knows? It might go back on pause. I hope not.
So you say patients, employees, consultants, board, investors.
Yeah.
I mean, you customers. I mean,
the broader network. Yeah, the world, because the whole world watches startups. It's like a sport.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like when you're telling you could be really passionate about a story. Do you ever run into a dismissive investor who prove to me why I should even give you 2 minutes?
I don't attract people like that to my life very much, to be honest. I believe in radical ownership. So I believe that when my life's going great, I manifested it. When my life is not going great, I manifested that too. I think that's another reason to be really anchored into the vision and the purpose. What are you doing and why does it matter? Mm-hmm. That thing needs to be on, like, that's the bass drum of everything that the CEO does, I think. Yep. Because people forget the story. One of my early mentors said that, because I had this awesome, offsite leadership thing. We had all this, and 3 months later, everybody was like, couldn't remember anything we said. I was like, we just said, I even wrote it down. It's on a poster and we have the slides. Dave, why doesn't anybody remember?
Right, it's right here.
I sent the minutes.
It's in the file, minutes file.
people forget the story. You got to keep telling them the story. It's such a simple thing.
Yeah.
But it's a practice, right? And if the CEO gets grumpy every time people forget the story, that's no fun.
And I think a lot of companies, even outside of the startup world, you've worked with some large companies as well. The further and further removed you get from the telling of that story, especially as you start hiring people and you get VPs and managing directors and line managers, and all of a sudden, like, nobody knows anything.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a great point.
They lose that. And a lot of that is because it's been lost through the management ranks over time. And that's why I say it's not only a story, it's you better believe in it. That should be your guiding light all the time, every day, for forever, right? I mean, that's what I would think.
I think that's an excellent point, but I don't think that that's as easy to do as it sounds. At least it hasn't been for me. For me, I have had to take an enormous amount of personal time to really understand the data and listen to what patients are saying, listen to what clinicians are saying, listen to what investors are saying. Yep. CEOs often think that their job is to talk, and I agree with that completely. But it's 2x. You got to be listening. What are your employees saying? What are patients saying? And is the story you're telling responding to that, or are you off in your own world, right? I've always been an avid video conferencing person because I do believe in being able to see people. Like when you're talking, you get to but you can listen for it too.
Yes.
Listen to that engagement. And, do I believe the story? And if I don't, why? And go deeper into it so that it becomes unshakable. What you do believe becomes unshakable. And investors will always it's their job to pick at your story until they find the weak spots. And every story has weak spots. If you haven't done that work yourself, to really get down to all the holes in the bucket and be clear about the reality of them, and also what you're going to do about it, and why you still believe. Actually, that to me is probably the most convincing moment in an investor pitch, is talking about the hard parts of the story, not the good parts of the story.
I think you're nailing it right there. If we don't talk about this, and these are the inevitable obstacles we're likely to hit, and that's okay. But if you're willing to go down that path, I would think you have credibility. I think you go into it way too optimistic or only showing the positive. I think you start to lose credibility, especially with people that are sizing you up. So good advice. I think really, really good advice. I know you got a million things going on, but I have a few more questions I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, do it.
So, and before I get into that, is there anything else that I should know, or people should know, women should know about this whole space you're in that maybe you didn't say today, or that I didn't ask you? Anything that you want to put out there that we didn't cover?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to make a prediction. I believe, so there have been billions of dollars invested in femtech over the last 4 years. And I believe, and even though it's 50% of the population, there's no Medtronic for women's health. So I believe there's going to be a big consolidation coming in the next 3 to 5 years, where people will begin buying these companies. And I think Materna is in that group. People begin, it may be a private equity play, it may be one of the larger players, but I think you'll see that when you invest in women, you do win. And it's not just a niche, it's 50% of the population.
Yeah, I am shocked. I still can't get it out of my mind that at how far behind the medical industry is in this space. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's very complicated to measure. I mean, there's a lot of layers there, and it's fascinating, but it's beautiful to, again, in the same spirit, it's beautiful to look at it for what it is, see where the holes in the bucket are, and then begin to heal them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally doable.
Absolutely, well said. All right, here are my really, really difficult questions. They're going to stop. All right, what kind of books do you read, and are you reading anything now that we should know about?
Yeah, I'm an avid reader, but I'm one of those people that's reading like 5 books at a time.
Yep.
Right now, I am reading Becoming by Michelle Obama. I'm also reading by Speaking Treason Fluently, a collection of essays by an anti-racist, angry white man. And it's absolutely, I mean, it's a must read.
So you have two: Becoming Michelle Obama, and then Speaking Treason
Fluently. And I usually have something light. I don't have anything like that right now.
All right, second question. Who do you turn to when you need a place to drop your guard?
Oh, I have an executive coach. I have created it also very intentionally with my family.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I can really say what I need to say to my family, my husband and my children. And I encourage them. That's one of our beliefs in our family, which is, we always say this: everybody gets what they want or something better. You may not get exactly what you want, but if you don't tell people what you want or what's going on, then we can't get through it and creatively get something together. But you also have to be willing to listen to what the other person wants, and they have to be willing to say it. So that's one of our practices in our family. And so I'm very, sometimes it's confronting, but I feel like we level up as a family every year. I don't necessarily think that CEOs should get vulnerable in every space that is available to them, but they definitely need a space to get vulnerable.
Yeah. It can be lonely. It can be a lonely place when you have so many different people to serve, and sometimes you don't have all the answers, and you're not always feeling great that day, or who knows, right?
Yeah, you're never going to have all the answers. It's like trying to carry the world on your shoulders.
What do you do to maintain balance outside of work?
Oh yeah, I exercise and meditate a lot. I try to get at least half an hour of both every day. I would definitely not call myself an athlete. My husband would just laugh. He's very sporty.
Yeah.
I don't really know that much about sports ball, all the different parts of sports ball.
Yeah.
But I find that just like getting exercise like kind of wipes the slate a little bit of crazy mind.
Every day?
Pretty much. I'm better. Certainly since COVID, I've been getting exercise almost every day.
Nice.
There's more time. I'm not sitting in a car. I'm not sitting on a plane.
It's a good way. It's a good way to spend your time, clear your mind. Let your body know you're thinking about. What do you do best? If you had to pick one thing.
What do I do best? I see people at their best. I think that's one of my superpowers. I do not always respond to everything that is right in front of me. I really have a practice of seeing them as at their best, and speaking to that and trying to call that out of myself and call that out of the other person. And I think when you do that, you get better outcomes. All
right, last question. What's next for Materna as it navigates the current climate? Just within the next year. Don't go too far.
It's an exciting time for us. We launched our first product last year. We're raising a $10 million Series A2 round right now. So we're about halfway through that. And hoping to get that closed up by Thanksgiving. And we're just finishing up we just launched our clinical trial also with a $2.2 million grant from the NIH. And so we're adding clinical sites to that, and we'll hopefully knock that out in the next year or two.
All good.
Yeah, all good. Yeah.
I'm not hearing any depressing stories, any negativity or cynicism. I love this. This is great.
You're great at what you do, David, and I love that you've started a podcast.
It's fun, and I enjoy these conversations, and I'm hoping that they're helping people out there. The listeners and the downloads are going up, so that's a good sign. I really appreciate you taking the time. I don't know that I'll be out in California anytime soon, but if not, maybe we can do a Zoom again before the end of the year.
Absolutely. The world will get smaller again. I'm lit up. I love what I do. I love the people we serve, and I love talking about it. So thank you for making space in your podcast for me.
You've been listening to Cut Through the Noise with Dave Turano. Please subscribe, and for more information, check us out on Instagram at CTTN Podcast.